Welcome back.
Welcome back. It's been so long. This is Inside the Light podcast.
I'm Lizbeth.
I'm Edgar.
And we're happy to be back. It has been a season of silence. And that's actually what we want to get into today. It's been a couple of months since you've last heard from us, and throughout those months, we've entered a season of preparation and becoming equipped, not only with the Word of God, but also within our own spiritual lives. A lot of growth, a lot of healing, and quite literally building an altar. Our church was under construction, and as you can see, there's a whole new setup for Inside the Light. We want to take a moment of gratitude towards our pastors, towards Victor, because, you know, they put in these hours and all of this time, and, you know, the love, it's there and it's very evident, and we're just truly grateful. The words that I have are insufficient to express the gratitude that we have with how much they believe in us and in the vision that God has placed within our hearts.
This is a beautiful setup.
It is.
I think it is a beautiful setup. It kind of reflects what God has been doing in this season. When He does things, He does them beautiful and wonderful. And we're so happy to be back. We missed you guys. A lot of people were reaching out regarding the podcast, and we're back, and we're gonna be here for a little while. We're here to spread the gospel. We're here to talk about our personal experiences and be that light that God has called us to be.
Yes. You know, we have had a lot of questions, and we may not address them all today, but we will be speaking specifically towards the season in which we have found ourselves in. A lot of times when you hear season of silence, or at least for me personally, I remember the first time I was ever called into a season of silence, my immediate thought was like defense mode. Because I was like, what do you mean you have to stay silent? Like, a season of what? What does a season of silence mean? Like, I can't defend myself. I can't speak. I can't. And in our reality, that's not what it was at all. And something that I have learned throughout my process is I've been in 2 seasons of silence so far in my journey, and I know that they won't be the last. The first season of silence that I walked through was a season in which the Lord truly began to restore a lot within me. And He began to heal pieces of me that I didn't even know needed healing, and those that I was very aware of that required that healing journey. And that season of silence just looked more like a season in which I had to realign my life to God's vision and purpose for me. And then the second season of silence that I went through more recently was a season in which I had to truly learn to know God's voice. And I think that this season of silence was probably like, I think even more emotional than the first, because when I went through the first season of silence, it was like, okay, like I get it, you know, like I have to heal. So I think a lot of that process, that's what it looked like for me in that first season of silence. And so it was like, okay, like, yeah, I get it. Like, there's so much growth and so much work that needs to be done. And it's kind of like I'm going undercover for a little bit. Like, I'm going to go like, you kind of just like drop off the face of the planet almost. And you're just kind of go into this deep dive of just trying to become the best version of yourself. But in the second season of silence, there wasn't really like that pain. There wasn't like an explanation as to why am I going through this season, you know? And I remember when I had first started it, when I had first began to walk through this season, there was a moment where like I stopped hearing the voice of God audibly in my life, because there were so many times where I would go into my war room and I would kneel and I would pray, and it was like I could hear the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And it turned into a time where it was like, normally when I would feel the presence of God, like it would be speaking in tongues or dancing in the Spirit. And I went into this season where I wasn't feeling Him in that way. And I did feel His presence, but I just didn't feel it manifest in the way that I was used to, in the way that I was accustomed to. And so when I went into this second season of silence, it was like, why am I not feeling you the way that I used to? And I began to feel like I haven't spoken in tongues in such a long time. I haven't danced in the Spirit in such a long time. And I'm like, I cry in your presence and I feel that rushing winds and I feel your warmth and your embrace, but I'm like, I don't feel you like I used to. And for the longest time, I thought that I was doing something wrong. And the Lord told me, no, I'm doing something new. And the reality is, like, I heard after a couple of months, the Lord ministered to me, and he said, how do you expect to hear my voice in the middle of the noise when you can't identify my voice in the silence? And he was like, instead of crying for what you think you're doing wrong, ask me what I'm trying to show you. Instead of being like, God, why don't I feel you the way that I used to? Why don't you tell me, God, show me this new thing that you are doing? And there are seasons in our lives where we will begin to experience God move in different ways. And we have to be ready for that, because if you don't truly know God and you don't know the voice of God, then when you are transitioning into these seasons, it can be very shaky.
I think this season, a lot of times when we hear season of silence, we're like, oh, a lot of y'all don't know, but I deny it, but I am Hispanic. Fulano está en pecado y por eso él no está en el altar. Or we say, oh, we don't see those people no more. They must be going through it. Season of silence doesn't necessarily mean that you're going through it, or God is rectifying you for some hidden sin that you might have, or it doesn't mean any of those things. What it does mean is a moment of silence. A lot of times, how many times have you been to the park and you're either going for a run, or you went for a picnic, or you went to go hang out with some friends at the park, but you never really sat down at the bench and just listened to the water. You never looked at the animals that were swimming. You never looked at the ducks and how they were going with their babies, or just the nature that's around you, the sound of the gusts of the wind. You never really notice those things because there's a lot of noise in our everyday life. And so a moment of silence, or moments of silence, are necessary for God to get you to where he needs to get you. Be like, hey, you got a lot of noise in your life right now. We're gonna silence the voices. We're gonna heal whatever we need to heal, and we're gonna get you to that next step in your journey. And I think this season of silence is a time where I've literally had to pour my heart out to those mentors that I have, that God had placed in my life. A lot of times, I always come up with random analogies. I think of a gardener who is given all the tools, the instruments. He's given the garden hoe and the rake and the seeds and the water and all these millions of other all these things that you need to grow. By the way, I want to farm, so I'm putting that out there. And you have all these things that are intended for you to grow, to harvest, to wait, and you do not use them. Instead of using the rake, you're using your hand, you're bending over, you're hurting your back. And that's what was going on in my life. I had all these tools, and I don't mean tools like they were dumb. I meant tools like they were instruments. I had all these instruments that the Lord was using in my life, and I wasn't using them. They were just there, and they were waiting for, they had an embrace, a welcoming embrace, but they were there. And I feel like in this season of silence, where I went through depression, I'm getting out of that now. Glory to God. The time of anxiety, and self-reflection, a lot of the things that were going on in my life were ego related, and ego is something that will destroy your life. You don't know you're at the level that you are, as far as like putting your pride and your ego, until everything around you is sinking. And so I didn't go to these people out of necessity. Well, I did need to go to them, But I didn't go to these people because, oh, this is my last resource. No. God put these tools in my life so that they could guide me. They had been through the same things that I had been through. They had been depressed. They have dealt with anxiety. They had dealt with betrayals. They had dealt with almost every single scenario that I could mention. They had went through them. And the fool always thinks that he knows better than everybody else. I'm here to tell you that if you're in rooms where you're the wisest man, I'm telling you, you're in the wrong room. Little hyphen tag Lisbeth Robles. If you are in a room where you are the wisest man, leave the room. You're in the wrong room. Every room that you walk into, you should be learning. You should be a sponge. You should be observing everything that's going around you. You do not know everything. And so this season, I've been learning to kill my pride and my ego. I don't have the solution to everything. I can't do everything on my own. I'm a human being. I need to be vulnerable. I need to pour out my heart. And as a Christian, as a disciple, you need to learn how to be vulnerable.
And I do want to just draw an emphasis on the fact too that we both went into these this season of silence, but we both experienced it so differently. Because where you went into kind of like that season of healing and that season of, realigning yourself with where you were standing with God, I was going through a season of learning to identify his voice, even when there was absolutely no noise around me, and learning to be able to hear him and drown out everybody else's opinion. And so I think that, I kind of want to dive in a little bit deeper into that. And I remember when we were talking about, when we were planning this episode, I was speaking to my husband and I was like, I don't know, if I want to dive into one of these bigger topics that we have right now. But I feel strongly in my heart to talk about a season of silence because we just got out of it. And then, we literally had the closing on Sunday of this is the close of the season of silence, where our pastor said it in the church in the preaching. And it was just that further confirmation of wow, we're relaunching on Monday and the season of silence has come to a close.
And there's so many blessings right now. One of the things we almost forgot to even talk about was when we were having this conversation on Sunday when we were driving back from Tampa, and we were talking about Job.
So I think when we were kind of discussing the end of the season, and we were talking about the podcast and how we were going to go about this episode, I remember the Lord just kept placing into my heart the story of Job. And it's a specific story in the Bible that I've read, a testimony in the Bible. I don't really like to use the word story. It's a testimony. But that testimony in the Bible, it was it just kept bringing me back and bringing me back. And the specific verse that it kept bringing me back to over and over again, I actually have it pulled up here. It's in Job 42, and it's verse 5. It says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." And this was in the midst of his process before the multiplication even happened, because the multiplication happens later in verses,
literally in the last
few verses. Well, right after 42, yeah.
It's in 42, but it's the last few verses.
Yeah. And so it was the multiplication came after that.
And I want to touch on one point. God is upset with Job's friends. I'd always interpreted their whole back and forth, and I had always been like, oh man, they were terrible friends. But even God was upset with the friends. In 42, it says this, and I caught this today, and God gives specific instructions to one of the friends, and he says, I need you guys to go get an offering and sacrifice with Job, and you need Job to pray so that I won't put my hand over you guys. And it says that after they prayed and repented, Job was multiplied, which is crazy, right?
I think, honestly, I think it's incredible the way that God takes and restores things. But I think one of the biggest things that I kept bringing back with the story of Job was just mainly the fact that it's this was a man that had lost everything. and I mean absolutely everything. This was a man that was in depression. He was suicidal. And these are really big topics that I love to talk about because it's something that we see a lot of the people today struggle with: depression, anxiety, identity, suicide. It's one of like the biggest battles that we're actually rising up against as a church, and, reminding people the value and the purpose that is within their lives. But a lot of it stems from these situations that they have encountered and experienced where, like the pain becomes so difficult, and we still have, churches that are telling people depression isn't a thing, or that's a spirit and it needs to be rebuked. And so I'm not going to get too much into that today. But the point with it all is that, like, when Job said these words, he still hadn't received the multiplication. He still hadn't received the miracle. And so he had just finished walking through this process, and the process wasn't even completely done yet. And he was like, I had heard of you, but now my eyes see you. And so in this season of silence, I remember like going through so many like difficult things. And like I'm sitting here today, and I knew this was going to be an emotional episode. But I'm sitting here today, and I remember like we had an event actually on Friday, and it was with the young adults of our church. And this event, we had like a little dynamic, and in the dynamic, we had these plates in this little Ziploc bag, and the pastor came and he like hammered the plates, and the plates represented our hearts, right? And I know later on I made a joke and everybody confirmed it, but I was like, oh, like he only hit it twice. We can put this back together, no problem. And then Mom came back around.
I thought the same thing.
We all did.
I was like, oh, 5 pieces? Like,
we got this, yeah.
And then out of nowhere, boom.
And it was like another one.
It wasn't just one. It was like two,
3.
4.
It just kept going.
And I was like, oh,
like, yeah, this isn't going to
God.
be easy. And the whole purpose of this dynamic was literally like piece your heart back together, like as if like, this is kind of like a reflection of what God is doing when he's working with you while he's molding you. And I remember like sitting at this table and like just piecing it together. And, one of the things that I had struggled with so much in my life was rejection. And one of the things that God truly worked with me is like understanding my value. In this season, it was like understanding my value, even in the midst of that rejection, even in the midst of everything that had been said or spoken about me or to me. And I like specifically, like there were so many moments in my life where I asked myself, like, God, like, why did this person do this to me? Like, if I poured out all this love, if I gave everything I had, like, why did it end on this bad note? Or even like circumstances where it's like, God, like you spoke this word over my life, and I've got people in my life that don't even believe this word, and they're speaking against it. And it's like, I'm like, what do I do? Like, is it even true? And I began to just doubt because of all the noise.
And I feel like that season of silence was delayed. Like it should have happened a long time ago. However, we know that God's timing is perfect. I could think that it should have been a long time ago, but what God had it planned. We've been in the gospel for how many years?
I want to say about 5 years now.
5 years. And I remember I was like, man, I gotta do this again. Like I feel like a new person. Like I gotta sit here through Bible study again, discipleship. I have to do my little daily devotionals. I have to turn them in. I have to do all these things. And I remember in the closing of this season, I remember seeing a video. It was a short, and it was about Kobe. I don't know if any of you guys know, but Kobe Bryant was a basketball player. He was mentoring this kid who used to practice with him. He says specifically, if there was one thing that I took from his advice, I took this one, and it changed my life. And he said, fall in love with the fundamentals. Never get bored with the basics. Never get bored with the basics. A lot of times, people want to fall in love with the crossover, the step back, and all these other things. That's great. Develop your game. But worry about the basics. Spend hours in the basics, because when you do the basics, you fall in love with the principle. And in this circumstance, we're talking about basketball. But if you apply this to your life, we're talking about Jesus. If you fall in love with the basics of Jesus Christ, you will be in love and in tune with the Lord, because the basics are the essentials, and we can't forget about that.
And sometimes we just get called to like how fast paced we're moving. I remember there was a season where everything was like go, 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 and everything was just moving so like, quickly.
Where's God first?
Yes, and
where's God first in the meal? on your way to work.
Yes. It became like a rush almost, or like a routine.
It's like, oh, I got to pray so that,
Yeah.
let me fill you in here at this time.
Or let me schedule.
Or
Yeah,
let's
exactly.
schedule a
Like, let me
prayer.
schedule it. Let me make sure I wake up at 5 a.m. every single day and do my prayer time. I'm going to do my devotional at 6:15, and then I'm going to do my workout, and then I'm going to continue with the rest of my day. And then you remove room for the Holy Spirit to just flow. And so when we talk about going back to the basics, we have to remember, like, what did that basic look like long ago? And, one of the books that we're studying right now are the habits of Jesus, and we're studying this in our discipleship in church. And one of the habits that Jesus had was isolation and prayer. And that was one of the basics. It's making sure you spend that time apart to be able to hear the voice of God audibly. And these seasons of silence, of silence are meant to align you so that you can hear him clearly, so that you can begin to identify and learn what his voice sounds like. Because it just brings us back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like, if you can't identify my voice when it's silent, how do you expect to identify my voice when there is noise surrounding you?
Today I decided to read Job again. And I remember I'm reading, and God is funny, because a lot of people, when they hear about the book of Job, they detest the book. And they detest the book because they're like, man, this guy was just minding his own business, putting God first. And then God's like, nope, iron sharpens iron. Mm-hmm. Nope, I'm sorry.
Take everything away.
I'm going to take everything away.
Let the enemy test you.
Like, and the crazy thing is, I want when they read this book, I want you to look at the wording and the verbiage that's used in this book. Because a lot of times, I hear people say, oh, but God brought that affliction over his house. It doesn't say that.
He allowed it.
He allowed it for a reason. And he gave temporary power, I put very big quotation marks, temporary power to the devil.
And I think one of the biggest key factors about that, and I remember like the first preaching that I heard, because I had read the book of Job before, and this preaching made me reread the book 2 more times. And it was our pastor. And he was talking about how God literally said, have you considered my good and faithful servant Job?
And I remember I was telling you, I was like, the devil has to be like dumb or something, because God is literally telling him, have you considered him? He is righteous and blameless. And then the devil says, he says, oh, surely you built a fence around him. Remove the fence and watch how he curses you.
And that's the big thing, too. It's like there was a circle of protection. I remember a pastor was talking about this in that preaching, too. It was like it was a circle of protection that had to be removed in order for the enemy to be able to do what God was authorizing him to do in that moment and giving him access to. And a lot of people miss that in the book. And I remember, I had read Job before, and I was listening to our pastor preach about this, and I was like, oh, I need to read this again.
Oh, yeah.
I need to dive right back into this book. I was like, I missed something. And then I went back and I reread it, and I was like, wow. And so like for like applying that to like now to like current day, it's like when we go through afflictions, and mind you, we don't go through like nearly, and I'm not minimizing anybody's pain, I'm not minimizing our tribulations, please don't misunderstand that. But because this is another thing, and me and my husband were talking about it, it's like a lot of times we read testimonies in the Bible like it's a story. Like, oh, I'm reading a story. Like, I'm reading this book about, something or someone, and it's like this small little thing, and it's like, no, you're reading a testimony. This happened. This is real. This is somebody's life. What we're capturing in about 40 pages or 40 chapters occurred in years, and there's so many different people in the Bible that we can pull from and talk to about it. So a lot of times, like, we read the stories like Job, Isaiah, Jeremiah, David,
Abraham.
and we're like, that's... Pasaron 5 páginas.
5 pages later, I'll get
everything's fine. He just had to hold on for 5 seconds. And it's like, no, like you really have to dive in, and you have to put yourself in that person's position, because this is not a story. This is a testimony. This is somebody's life. And it actually like happened in such a long span of time. And so Job's suffering wasn't a suffering of 40 days. It was 42 chapters that we got in the Bible. It wasn't 42 days of suffering. This happened for years. It was years and years and years of suffering. And for somebody to have everything taken away from him and time and time again, be able to say, the Lord taketh and the Lord giveth, blessed be thy name, in the middle of your suffering. When I had reread that with the mindset that I read now, I would have understood, like, this isn't going to fix itself in 30 days. This isn't going to fix itself in 2 months. And sometimes we say, like, well, God spoke this promise over my life 5 years ago. Well, there are people in the Bible that waited 85 years to be able to see a promise, fulfilled. And I'm not saying that that's how long it's going to take for your miracle to occur. At the end of the day, when God says something, he's going to do it. But the reality is, like, even if, and that's a mentality that, I'm actually really grateful for. And my friend, sister, Rochelle, she actually, like, draws an emphasis to this verse so much. And I think it's in the book of Daniel, where she says, like, and even if he's still good, even if I don't see the promise in this lifetime, my God is still good. Even if the miracle doesn't occur in the timeline that I need it to happen, he's still good.
Yep.
And Job understood that. Even if I lose everything, he's still good. And the reality is that in the season of silence, I was looking back at everything, just to start kind of coming to a close here. And I just remember, like, thinking back to all of these times where I was, like, crying and, pouring my heart out to God. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I know, like, if there's ever a person that we can truly be vulnerable with and give our, like, hearts and our emotions and our feelings to, even if they're a complete disaster and a mess, it's God. That one place that that you can run to and just pour yourself out to, it's in his presence. It's at his feet, I'm going to admit it. I'm a huge crybaby, okay? I'm a crier. I cry for everything, every good thing, every bad thing, every little thing, every in between. I don't hide it. But, I was looking back and I was like, man, like, I wish I had the wisdom that I had now.
Oh.
And I remember, like, when I would literally be up until, like, 6 a.m. crying and just worshiping God and just saying, God, like, just please just take this from me. Just pass this cup from me. Please. Like, I can't do this anymore. My heart is breaking, and I feel like I don't have anybody. I feel like I can't run to anybody. And I remember, like, at the time that I stepped into this season, it was like 2023. It was 2023. And I remember, I remember in this, not yet. And I remember in this specific season, when I had so many people around me that told me that they loved me, and so many people around me that I had poured so much into. And I just poured and poured and poured until I ran empty. And it was so hard, because the minute that it's like I began to isolate myself because I no longer carried the strength or the courage to, like, be able to, like, give people the strength that they needed, I became completely alone. I was so shut down. And I remember, like, this one night I had stopped going to church for a little bit. And I remember, like, this Saturday night, I was, doing my thing where it was like 6 a.m. in the morning and I couldn't sleep. And we had already agreed that we were going to visit churches that Sunday. And I remember that very night, I said, God, I am in such a vulnerable position in my life right now. I'm at my lowest. I have nothing to give. And if I don't find a home, like, if I don't find pastors, if I don't find that help that I need, I am going to perish. I'm not going to make it. Like, it's just not going to happen in my life. And I said, God, like, whatever door I walk into, even if that's not the door that I'm meant to walk into, I need you to minister to me and tell me, like, this is where I need you to go. This is where I need you to be, because if you don't, this is where it ends. And that day we visited my brother-in-law, his brother's church. And Japhet, I love you. Thank you for bringing me home. I will always say that. I'm forever grateful. And I remember that, like, in this moment, like, we went to visit his church. And when we went there, the preaching was just, it was a great preaching, but it wasn't really anything that I could resonate in that moment. But I had come with, like, I came with a determined mindset. I was like, I need to be spoken to today. And we had both walked up to the front that day. I was like standing there and I was like, God, you know, I told you
I swear the
I
altar call
need
was
you.
like an hour long.
Yes. And I was like,
An hour
God.
long.
And I literally, I'm sorry.
And I would open my eye.
and they would walk
like,
right past
"Oh my
us.
God,
And I
what
was
are
like,
you
what is
doing?"
happening? It was like, I remember I was so frustrated. And I was like, I'm going to leave. Like, I'm just going to leave. And I remember I looked at you and you were like, just be patient. And I was
And
like,
I kind of felt your frustration.
yeah.
I was like,
no one's talking.
I'm upset myself, but like, come on, like,
We're like, be patient. And I was like, no, they just keep walking past us. Like, I'm like, they're not going to speak to us. I'm like, well, I guess God doesn't have a word for me today.
I'm sure God was looking up at heaven, laughing. He's like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
and
look
he
at
was
these
like,
people at the altar call, like arguing, like."
no, literally in our heads, like having a whole argument with God. Like, who are we? And I remember, like, in that moment, I was like, God, like, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to speak because I already told you what's going to happen. Now, when I look back at that, I'm like, how great was God?
Amazing.
And how merciful was he with me in that moment? Because I was very stubborn and I was like you have to speak to me.
Yeah, we're speaking to him entitled.
Yeah, and I was like, no, like you owe me this word, because if you don't give me this word, I'm like, this is where I throw the towel and I'm done. Like, I walk away. And now I look back at that and I was like, wow, like, God, like, thank you for having mercy on me. Thank you for understanding the place of pain that I was in. And that's why, like, I truly am grateful that he is a father. He is a father that loves his children, because where he could have just been like, who are you? Like, I gave my son to die for you and you're going to sit there and talk to me like that? Like, what do you mean? Because if anybody has the entitlement to do that, it is God. And he doesn't. He looks at you and he's like, I got you. Like, I have you. Just trust me. It's going to be okay. And he's patient and he's kind. And I remember that day. Like, so detailed. And I remember when they finally came to us, we were the last people they ministered to. That altar was full with like 30, 40 people.
And when we opened our eyes,
we opened our eyes and we were the last ones standing. And I was like, well, the last one standing, here we are. And I remember, like, in that whole, like, situation, like, when they said I remember the words that they had said to us. They said, you know, turn around and give your new pastor a hug. And
I thought that was crazy.
They weren't even the pastors of that church.
Nope.
Like, the pastors of the church we are at now, La Casa de Levi, House of Levi. And I remember that, and I will always say this, I remember that moment because there was just so much pain that I was carrying. And there were so many things that I just kept asking God for. And when he said, just turn around and give your new pastors a hug. And I turned around and I hugged Mom. And I broke. Because with all the pain that I had felt and all the pain that I was carrying, it was like I finally had a mother holding me and telling me, like, it's gonna be okay.
And we had a
and
father.
You felt it. And then Dad came and he gave me a hug. And I remember his words. I will never forget the first words he ever uttered to me when he knew that I was now gonna be one of his children in his church. And his word for word, I remember this. He said, "You're a precious pearl, and not everyone knows how to value you."
Wow.
And I am so honored that God is giving me the privilege to be able to value you. And I remember those words, like it was like it healed something in me, because it was like, finally I'm seen. You know, it was like, finally, like, I'm in this moment where someone, like, sees me and they see my value, my worth, and I'm at my lowest. I'm broken, I'm hurting, and I'm in this depression and anxiety and all these different things that I was going through in that season. And this person just held me and said, like, you're so valuable. And I will never forget that, because it was the start of something that shifted in my life. And that was the first season of silence that I had encountered, because it required me to go into, like, learning to stay silent while I healed everything that I had gone through. And then transitioning into this second season of silence where I'm realigning I remember like they placed me in the worship group, and you know, for a long time I was like, I just don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm equipped. I don't know if I can do this. And I remember mom would fight with me so much. She's like, you got Mija, you can do this. You got this. Like, it's gonna be okay. Like, you can do it. And I'm like, I just don't know. Like, I think I need more classes. And I just kept putting excuses and excuses. And I didn't realize that a lot of those excuses came from a place of like just doubt, because it had been sown into me.
There's so many people that
just didn't believe. And the thing is, like, when you're talking about these seasons that you're placed in, like, and this is where I'm tying it back into where it doesn't happen in 30 days and 40 days, because I went through 2 months of this. And after being placed into their hands, I was still fighting this depression, and I would call them and go to dinner at their house almost every single day we were there. And it was crazy. They never shut their doors. I remember this one time where it was like I was still going through this, and I began to confess everything in my life. And I remember like I had the courage to speak up and say, like, you know, when I was a child, like, I was molested. I went through this. And, you know, when I got married at 18, like, I went through abuse. And, you know, and I started telling them like my everything that I had gone through in my life. And you know, like, there's no coincidence with God, because he placed me in the hands of people that have been through similar things.
Mm-hmm.
And
church hurt we've had.
The same church hurt, the same, like, a lot of the same testimonies, different experiences, but a lot of the same testimony. Because the first time that I had ever had the courage to speak those words, I remember the first thing I was told was, you're going to have to take that to the grave. And
I remember.
I don't, like, this is not like meant to be anything that's like rude, but if you're a pastor, I want to take a pause in this moment right now. If you're a pastor and you have somebody coming to you and is saying to you, this happened to me, or this is happening to me, it is your duty as a pastor, as somebody who is meant to shepherd your sheep, as somebody who is meant to lead, as somebody who sees, you know, your congregation as your children. It is your obligation to ensure their safety. You may not have to get directly involved, but there are hotlines that you can call in anonymously. And I do want to make people aware of that. If you're afraid of what the law might look like, if it falls back on you, just call the hotline. There is a hotline for you to report these things and talk about it. But do not ever silence somebody when they speak of the pain that they've been through. They finally got the courage and the confidence to speak up about it, and you're telling them stay silent. All of that work that God has been doing in them to start to like break them out of those chains and that depression, you're essentially setting them backwards.
A lot of young believers, when they first come to the faith, they see these pedestals, or they put a lot of the, you know, in our humanity, we put these pastors, which we shouldn't. It's idolatry. But we put these different types of people who have religious positions on these pedestals. And I'm here to tell you that all of your heroes, they fail. You get to meet them. You see all your heroes, they fail. There's a song by Andy Mineo where he talks about him meeting one of his heroes. And they fail because you're not supposed to put your trust in man.
They're human.
You're a human being.
And they're going to make mistakes.
And so when you put your trust in a leader like that and they fail you in the way that they you know, that's just the natural state of us. We fail. And you put yourself in a predicament where you're not set up for really success. You know, you have this moment of vulnerability where you're expressing to that person how you feel, and they basically tell you, no, shut up. You don't know.
And it's like, at that point, it's like, how do you equip that person to tell their testimony? Because somebody is going to receive breakthrough through that testimony. There's somebody that needs to hear that story. And so I remember when I got placed into our pastor's hands, and Dad was telling us like his testimony, and I just remember being like, wait, like I didn't do something wrong by speaking up, and I was terrified. When I was going to tell him about it, I remember I was sitting at the table with Mom and Dad, and I was like, I don't know how to say this, and I was shaking, and I was so nervous because my biggest fear was somebody telling me like, no, stay silent. And I remember when he was like, it's okay. I've been there too. And he just began to like share his testimony and his time. And he told me like, you know, how he's gotten through it. And And if this person went through it and he can be a pastor and he can be an amazing father and he can have these children and that are great and have this great head on their shoulders and he has this amazing life and this amazing wife and like he's walking with God faithfully and walking in his promise and
Christ
living his
first in
truth in
everything.
every single scenario. I'm like, I can do it.
Like, it was the example. It was like that verse that Paul says, if you can't imitate Christ,
Then
imitate me
as I
and
do
it was
Christ.
like, wow, I have the embodiment here of
Imitating Christ.
Of imitating Christ.
And then going into like this second season where it was like trying to figure out, I'm like, why am I going in through another season of silence? Like, why? And it was like, no, you're still listening to the noise. Like you went through closing out your, like the healing of your depression. And, I freed you from that and I broke the chains and I set you free from your past, right? And he was like, now it's time to burn some bridges. And God confirmed that through the preaching on Sunday. He was like, now it's time to burn some bridges. Thank God for our pastor because he just allows himself to be used by God so well and confirms everything over and over again. We'll have a conversation in the car.
Perfect time for the plug-in, right?
Yes.
Sunday at 11, be here.
Yes. Well, not this Sunday, not August 3rd,
Not
the
this
following
Sunday.
one.
Vacation time.
Yes, family fun day.
Family fun day.
But, he was like, a lot of times, like, we want to go back to Egypt. Like, God already set you free. When he parted the Red Sea, it says that after the Israelites had made it through, the waters closed. There was no following or going back. It was like, this is it. The water's closed. Like, you're not walking through this.
Yeah, you're going to have to swim back.
And so, and I remember this preaching on Sunday, it just confirmed so much because it was like, sometimes God burns bridges of relationships in your life and you're sitting here trying to throw water on the bridge. Like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, wow, this is why I needed to go through the season of silence again, because I was learning to burn those bridges and just let them burn because I had a very bad habit of being a people pleaser and putting people's emotions first. And so I had to learn to be like, you know what? No, it's okay. It's okay that I went, I ghosted and I went AWOL because the relationship, it wasn't fueling. I can't have... I can't go into the promised land with somebody that has Egypt's mentality. It's not possible. I can't carry that with me. And so I was still doing that. And this second season of silence was just like, okay, like I need you to drown out the noise. I need you to get rid of it.
All the negative
All
Nancy's.
of it, everything. And I need you to just focus on my voice. And I need you to walk towards that promised land. And if those bridges are going to burn behind you, I need you to let them burn behind you.
Yep.
And that was like the biggest thing that I had to learn in this season.
And what's the main thing that you want people who are watching this podcast to get from today's episode?
There are seasons of silence that are meant for healing. There are things in you that need to be mended. There are things in you that need to be restored. And, you're going to have to go through the fire. And so a lot of times that first season of silence that you're going to walk through in your life is going to be that season of refinement. And then that second season of silence that you're going to step into is usually alignment. And it's getting you to identify the voice of God in like just as a soul, because a lot of times we hear so much noise and we don't know how to drown it out, and God is just asking us to focus on him. I want you to identify the season in which you're walking into in this moment. And second, I want you to know that if it's a season of healing, it's okay that you're broken. It's okay if you're falling apart. Bring it to him. There's no better beauty than the beauty of a broken prayer. And that was one of my favorite songs by Riley Clemens. It was Broken Prayers, because he doesn't want your perfection. He wants your beautiful mess, because he's going to take the pieces and he's going to restore it and he's going to make the masterpiece. The second thing that I want you to know is if you're walking into the season of silence where you're learning to identify God's voice, this is essential. Don't skip it. And don't feel like, because I remember for me, I felt like I was doing something wrong. You're not doing something wrong. God just wants you to be able to recognize his voice. And he wants you to be able to drown out the noise. And he's showing you something new. Ask God to reveal to you this new thing that he is doing in your life. And you will begin to see and understand the beauty of it all.
I think about 3 weeks ago, I did a Bible study. I decided to make this random study / preaching. And there's a show called Bladesmith or something like that. It's on one of those Discovery channels, whatever, where basically it's a competition. You have to make the best blade. Whatever blade wins, well, you win the competition. And it goes through these tests where they have to go through a flesh test where they stab a dummy. They have to forge it. It has to be made with specific material. And it has to go through all the processes that a swordsmith has to do in order to make a blade. And I remember in this study, I was reading and doing research, extensive research. There's so many different types of blades. There's so many types of different blades. They get different handles. They have different functions. They're different lengths. But not only are there so many specifications to what goes into the blade, how it's made. It goes through a process where it is hit with a hammer to be molded multiple times. It is heated over a blazing fire. It's placed on a stone, and there's a hammer that gets hit on it, and it keeps forming. And I remember specifically, I was looking at how the katana was made, and it has a double edge, and each side has to get molded, and the right edgeness and the right consistency. And there were so many processes in which, and when you thought that the blade was done being formed, there was getting burned and hit with the hammer again. And in the same way, this is a hard walk. Whoever thinks this is an easy walk where I'm just walking at the park and it's going to be a piece of cake, I'm here to tell you, it's not a walk where you're going to be miserable, because there's a difference between hard and miserable. It is a hard walk. It is not an easy walk. Success is not easy. If success is easy, it's not success. Something else. And so if you want a successful life in Christ, remember this walk is hard. It is a process where you're being formed every single day. And there will be times of silence.
I want to say, because it brought me back to it. It's in Malachi 3:3, and it says, "He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. Then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness." I remember I was watching this reel, and they were talking about this specific verse, and they actually went and sat with a silversmith, and they asked the silversmith, all of these questions. They were like, "No, you have to sit at the fire and you have to watch it while it's in the fire." And they were like, "Well, how do you know that it's ready?" And the silversmith, "That's easy." He laughed and he said, "That's easy when I can see my reflection in it." So when they're telling, when the word of God says he sits as a refiner and he's purifying us as silver and gold, that purifying is going to be a lifelong thing. That refinement is going to be a lifelong thing. But the goal is ultimately to be able to reflect him. Will we always get it right? No. Are we going to make mistakes? Yes. But the important part is that we always go back to him and ask for that guidance so that we can do it better and truly understand the seasons we're in, so we can become equipped for that.
Well, that's our first episode back. We hope that
You
guys
enjoyed
like
it.
the setup. Inside the Light is back. Please reach out to us. We want to pray for you. This is a season where you need to be vulnerable, where you need to reach out to those who have been instructed to help you. And we pray that this podcast is a blessing to you, where you may find yourself. God bless you guys. This was Inside the Light.